Okay, today we're going to be learning about how to read music, which I think is really important, and it can open up a whole world of music to you. And it's considerably faster than watching YouTube tutorials once you get good at doing it. So today I'm going to focus mostly on reading the notes themselves, the note names, and not as much on the rhythm. I'm going to have a separate video where I go into the details of reading rhythms in music notation. So we're going to start with a tune that we all know, Somewhere Over the Rainbow, so we don't have to worry about the exact rhythmic notation, and we can just focus on reading the notes, because that's where we need to start. The 5 lines, it's called a staff here, 5 lines, and I have this squiggly thing here, which is called a treble clef, and we'll get to that in a minute. For starters, you'll notice that I labeled my piano keyboard with the letters A to G in the musical alphabet. I have another video that explains about how to do that. I use a whiteboard marker, and I recommend doing that. The notes that go this way are you're moving up, so higher pitches, and down here, lower pitches. So this is down. So if I refer to up and down, that's what that means. You'll notice that in this 5-line staff, we can have spaces between the lines, or we can have the lines themselves. These are the 2 places on which notes can exist. And so we're going to focus on this 5-line staff that has this squiggly treble clef here at the beginning. And that's usually what the right hand reads from in piano music. Now, I've written over here common mnemonic devices for remembering what the note names are when they're written on the staff. So the first space, if you see a note, and by the way, that's a note, this little circle here, those are notes. That's going to be the letter F, and so forth, A, C, E, spelling the word face as you go upwards. So that's a good mnemonic for remembering the 4 spaces of the treble clef staff going upwards. A good mnemonic for remembering the notes that fall on the lines is every good boy does fine. Now you'll notice that the lowest line is an E, and then the space after that is an F. The next line is a G. So we're going in order of the alphabet. E, F, G. We're going upwards, and we're going upwards on the piano as we do that. The next note is A, and sure enough, our next space is A, up to B, up to C. So you can continue to create lines and spaces, and in so doing, you can find what the notes are, even if you only know one of these 2 mnemonic devices. One thing you'll also see, I should mention, is that occasionally you'll see people write an extra line or 2 underneath or above the staff. These are called ledger lines. And if I were to write a note, let's say right on this ledger line, I've written 1 ledger line below my 5-line staff. So let's count and see what note that would be. So here's our F of face. The line below that would be E of every. The space below that, which is sitting right underneath the staff, is going to be a D. And then working backwards in the alphabet, the ledger line, the note on that ledger line below that would be a C. And so that, incidentally, is middle C, the C that's in the very middle of the piano keyboard. And so when you see this note in the treble clef, that's where that's going to be. Now, we're going to come to the bass clef later in this video. And in the meantime, I want to introduce one more concept before we get the notes on the paper, which is the idea of key signature. And I'm sure when you look at a lot of sheet music, you'll see something that looks like this at the beginning or something that looks like this. And not always, but these are sharps. These number signs are hashtags. And what that means is, let's say this is a D. A D sharp is the black note to the right of D. And these little lowercase b looking things are called flats. And it's the opposite. So if I have a D here and I have a flat in front of it, we move 1 black note to the left. This is an F, so this is an F sharp, but it's also known as G flat. So these are the sharps and the flats. Now, if you see these at the beginning of your song, what that means is that whenever you have the note that's on this line up here, it's going to be sharp. So what is that note? Well, it's F. It's the F of fine. So what that means is every F in the song is going to be sharp. And here, the C's are also going to be sharp. Now, now even if you have this C down here, this middle C, even though it's different C than this, it's also going to be sharp. And even though the F sharp refers to this F up here, this F is also going to be sharp if it happens down here. So the sharps apply to any F or any C that you see throughout the piece. Now the only thing that can cancel out a sharp is called a natural. So if you see this funny looking symbol somewhere in the music, that's called a natural, and that would just mean, in this case, if I have a note after that, like a C, here's our C of face, and it has the natural before it, that means we're no longer making it sharp, which would be here. We're just going to play it regularly. So natural is just a fancy way of saying, hey, this is just a regular note. More often than not, it's going to be a white key. And similarly with flats, if we were to have this note here, this would be a B flat according to our key signature, because the middle line is B for boy. That would be a B flat because it's on that middle line, and all of the B's are flat. However, if we were to see this natural sign in front of it at some point, it would no longer be B flat. It would just be regular plain old B. So that's the idea of key signature and sharps, flats, and naturals. Now I'm going to go ahead and write the key signature for the song we're going to play, Somewhere Over the Rainbow. I want to do this in the key of D major, and you don't need to worry about what the key signatures are called for now. We can get to that at another time. So all of your Fs and all of your Cs are going to be sharp. Now again, this video is not going to focus too much on rhythm, although I did write some basics for rhythm down here. If you see something that looks like a donut here, that's a whole note. It receives 4 beats. A beat is just one of these. Half note receives 2 beats, and it looks like this. Quarter note receives 1 beat, looks like that. Eighth notes look like this, although they often come in pairs. They're worth half a beat, but when you have a pair of them together, they take up the place of a whole beat. Here's our first note of our melody. And so what note is that? Well, I'm going to go over to my mnemonic device here, and I'm going to find the lowest note I can find, which is E for every. That's the lowest line. So you're just going to walk down to the space right below that line right there. And here we are right there. We're going to go backwards in the alphabet, and we're just going from a line to a space. So we're going down, and that's just going to be a D. D is the note. D is the letter before E in the alphabet, right? So here is our D. The next note is going to jump up here. Now what note is that? I'm going to use my mnemonic for lines. Every good boy does fine. So D. So this is a different D though. Notice how the note goes up. It's so important to observe what directions the notes move, because that means you go from this D to the right up to that D. These are 2 different Ds. The next note is this. So what note is this? Well, we're going to use a different mnemonic. We're going to use the one for the spaces, which is face, F-A-C-E, and that falls on the 3rd space, which is a C. However, don't forget that all of our C's are sharp according to our key signature. So actually that's not this note, but it's this note, which is C sharp. And notice how close it is to that D. It's literally just 1 note away. And so on the piano, that means they're going to be quite close to each other. The C sharp is going to be just right there. It's not going to be any other C sharp. So you want to see, if the notes are very close to each other on the staff, they're going to be very close to each other on the keyboard. Let's take the next few notes at a time here. You'll notice that's a pair of 8th notes. They move a little faster. And reading along, we have the A of face here, the B from boy. There's that C sharp again. Now, I strongly recommend writing in the letter name of each note until you get good at reading music. It'll help speed up this process. And then all you have to do is just follow the letter names and then see whether the notes go down or up. And eventually what's going to happen is you don't need to write the letter names anymore. It's kind of like training wheels. You can just, now here, this squiggly thing is a rest. And these are a couple different kinds of rests right here that you might see. And again, we're not getting into rhythm too much in this video, but the rests essentially mean silence. So here's a little silence for you. So you're not going to play right away. And here, well, we can look at notes we figured out already for these next two. We've already figured out that that's a D, and this is a B. What's that? Well, it's the A of face, right? And now we're going to need a ledger line. Remember that extra line for this next note? And this is going to be not a C, because a C is the note that's on that ledger line. This is below the ledger line, so we have to go down, we have to go backwards in the alphabet. That's going to be a B, and followed by a G. And I'm going to write, that's the G of good there. I'm going to add an extra note here in the right hand that's supposed to be played at the same time as the G, and it's going to be, well, it looks a lot like that B, except it has this little lowercase b in front of it, which, as you'll remember, is our flat. And that means instead of B, we have B flat. And it's supposed to happen at the same time as the G. And this is probably a good enough time to point out that notes that are vertically aligned happen at the same time. That's a super important idea about reading music. If it lines up on top of it, we play these, the G and the B flat, at exactly the same time. I'm just going to pencil in these note names here that we covered. And then I like to write the lower note underneath the higher note. So the G refers to this and the B flat refers to that. So here's our melody so far. Rest. Now that's a sad spot to leave the melody. It's such a nice tune. So now I'd like to learn the bass clef. And if the right hand usually reads from the treble clef, by the way, also known as the G clef, because it shows you where G is, that little squiggly thing. The left hand reads from the bass clef, which is called the F clef, because these two dots show you where F is. And the mnemonic devices I used for this, for the 4 spaces, all cows eat grass. Well, that's not actually true. They should eat grass, but not all of them do these days. Anyway, A, C, E, G. That's how you remember those notes. And then for the lines, some people say good boys deserve fun always or something, but enough about good boys. We've had that. Green beans deliver folic acid. You can come up with your own, however you want to remember them. So I'm going to go ahead and write my key signature, showing that all of the F's are sharp, just like they were here, and all of the C's are sharp. But notice now that the F's and the C's are in different places. And that's the challenge between reading the bass clef, which is usually for the left hand, and the treble clef, which is usually for the right hand. I wish it were that simple that this note was an A in both hands. However, if we were to write that same note down in bass clef, it would be something else. So let's look at what those something else's are. Here's our F sharp, and sure enough, that's the F right there for folic on the 4th line. And here's our C sharp, and that's the C of cows there on the 2nd space. I'm going to go ahead and write 2 notes, and I'm going to try and vertically align them. Now here we want these 2 notes, which are D and F, but it's an F sharp. And we're going to be down here. So the bass clef, you're basically going to be sitting below middle C. Middle C in the bass clef is going to be a ledger line above the bass clef staff. So that ledger line there is the same note as the ledger line below the treble clef staff. Okay, so they kind of actually look similar. They both have that line going through them, and that's middle C. That's literally the same note. But everything in the bass clef staff, which is below that, is just going to be right around here in the piano, okay? So here we have D and F sharp. I'm going to write them. Again, writing the lower note lower, higher note higher. So here we are. That's what we have, D and F sharp, and that happens at the same time. Going on to the next bit. And again, we're not focusing too much on rhythm. We will do that in another video. All right, a couple all at once. Oh, there's our middle C. Oh, and there is our natural, which means that instead of the C being sharp like all C's should be in this piece, it's going to be natural. It's just going to be the plain old white key middle C. Now these lower two notes we've seen already, D and F sharp. And in fact, this note here is the same too. So we have an F sharp. So what is that top note here? Well, green beans deliver folic acid. It's A for acid. And here we just said D, F sharp, sorry, getting a little cramped here, and C, just plain old C, middle C. The next two notes are a G for grass, and then here we're going to have to count. It's not an A for acid because it's not on the line, but we're going to have to go up to the note right above that, and the space is going to be the B. A is on the line, so then B is going to be on the space, exactly one note higher. So here we have a B and a G. Now look at the vertical alignment. What this means is that the left hand is playing right when the right hand is resting. And then the right hand plays while the left hand is simply holding. In other words, the notes keep going here. You just hold them down. And then the right hand plays the D by itself. And then, at this moment, this is getting a little complicated. We have a C, but it's going to be a C sharp again because it does not have that little natural in front of it. Now, sometimes you'll even see composers will actually write the sharp. I'm kind of out of space here, but they'll actually write the sharp again in front of it to remind you that now that we're out of this measure, these are measure lines, so once you get out of the measure, the old rules apply about C's, so we're back to C sharp. But they'll just remind you anyway. That's called a courtesy. So that's actually going to be back to C sharp. And our next note here, what is that? It's the F of folic. So that's an F sharp. And I'm going to go ahead and write the next note. What is that? Well, it's the D of deliver, right? And one more note in the left hand. All cows eat grass. It's going to be the G. Now notice back here, this C sharp happens at the same time that the right hand plays the B. They're vertically aligned. They happen at the same time. So this measure, again, measure lines are these lines here, so everything in between is a measure, is a little complicated. So that's what's happening. Notice that my pinky, my left hand, is holding down the whole time. Good. I'm going to play a little bit from the beginning, get a feel for this. So both hands start together at the same moment. The left hand continues to hold down. Big moment. 4 notes together. Now just the left hand, right hand, and then I grab that note with the left hand. Now we're here. Now I'm going to add some nice little thing in the middle here for you. In the right hand. Make this, spruce up this moment a little bit. I'm going to be a little tight on space. I'm going to use the thinner marker. So here what we have is, using our key for the right hand, we have E for every, I'm gonna write this in marker here. D, which would be the note right below that. We've talked about middle C, but remember all C's are sharp. So this is a C sharp. And then we see the natural, which cancels out that sharp. So now it's a plain old C natural. And that leads us nicely down to B. And meanwhile, the original A, which is this upper note, is just being held in the right hand. So what we're going to have is E. The A stays the whole time. This is the A. And below it, we have the E going to D, going to C sharp, going to regular old C, C natural, and then finally to B. Okay? So I'm going to play that measure between these two measure lines here with the hands together. That makes a nice little line there. Good. So I'm going to play from the beginning. Just watch how this lines up with the music. And notice, for instance, that these quicker moving notes here are happening in the right hand while nothing is happening in the left hand. These notes are just being held. And if they weren't being held and they were supposed to stop, you would have seen something like this, a rest. You would have seen maybe that or one of these guys. Here comes our flat. And so once you can read music well, you could even continue playing something like that without having ever practiced it, which is really nice and potentially a huge time saver. And not only that, but you can write down your own music for yourself so you don't forget it, or for other people to play too. So reading music really does open up a whole world of possibilities, but you got to start somewhere. And I recommend starting with the pitches, labeling them in your music, using the mnemonic devices to remember what the pitches are. Remembering that the left hand behaves differently because it has a different clef than the right hand. So these are different set of mnemonic devices. And observing the vertical alignment, what happens at the same time and what happens at different times. And then observing when the notes go up, like for instance this to this, and then when they go down, like F sharp to D goes down, which is to the left. So in addition to labeling your piano keyboard, I recommend doing all of that. So watch out for the other video about understanding rhythm in reading music, and we'll get into that, and sight reading as well. So good luck with your reading music.